Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we know that the content in Thrones of Decay was originally planned to be of similar size to that of Shadows of Change, which is extremely depressing. But we also know now that they've delayed the DLC in an effort to give it more content to make it, well, worth 25 euros. You know, it's supposed to be that if we're going to be paying that much. Now, we've speculated in the past of what Thrones of Decay could have in terms of content, although I was keeping fairly reserved, mostly because I was expecting to get lowballed in Shadows of Change, and we did. So now what we can do is think about it with extra added content. Now, the reason for this little series is not just more copium and hopium, but the fact is we need to keep vocal. We might have gotten a bit of a win from Creative Assembly because they finally admitted that they were at fault and they're going to strive to make things better, but we need to keep reminding them. One thing that's very important to note here is Creative Assembly do make these mistakes fairly often, and it's important for us as a community to make sure that we remind them we're not going to get nickel and dimed. So with this series, what we're going to do is we're going to cut it up into 3 different videos, mostly because this is going to be fairly large, going into some deeper lore. And yeah, let's begin today with Nurgle. So the legendary lord for Nurgle is all but confirmed, but we pretty much know that it's Tuamurkhan at this point. We've had interviews with Rich Aldridge on various different websites and on my own channel where he basically confirmed it without saying confirmation. And yeah, if you look towards the lore, everything, or the stories that we've been seeing in Total War Warhammer 3, a lot of stuff has been pointing towards Zanbaijin. Zanbaijin is obviously very important for Tuamurkhan's story. The Throne of Chaos is also linked up to Thrones of Decay. They literally cannot make it more clearer than this. If it ends up being Epidemius, I think the whole community is going to blow a gasket. But yeah, Tuamurkhan is really important, mostly because he is a character that was introduced during the Throne of Chaos campaign, a campaign that never actually got completed. We only got 1 of the 4 books. A melee-focused character, but one that can take over the bodies of those who kill him. And by him, I mean the bodies that he controls. You see, Tuamurkhan is a maggot, incredibly small, but what he does is he exudes a lot of influence. When he is felled in battle, the maggot bursts out of the chest that he controls and tries to take over the next body. This is actually how the lore for Tuamurkhan actually goes in the Throne of Chaos book. There are a number of bodies he does end up controlling, with the one that's most commonly known being the Ogre Tyrant, which is the one that you normally see mounted on Bubulos. This is the gigantic toe dragon that you can see on screen right now, one of the best looking miniatures from that Forge World era. God damn, I love that miniature so much. Well, it's not even miniature at this point, it's huge. But yeah, melee character, this would be for Nurgle Monogod, and I know some people would prefer him to be as a Warrior of the Chaos faction, but really, what needs to be done here is introduce some god-specific characters for the monogods that are mortals, just to have a little bit of a difference. Because the problem is, when you look towards demons, you can get, say for example, Great Unclean One, Great Unclean One number 2, Great Unclean One number 3, or the Accountant. And that's not a legendary lord. So, Tuamurkhan would fit perfectly here, especially since he is one of the major characters. They were going to have a lot bigger stories in Warhammer Fantasy, but yeah, that went to shit. The narrative could literally be taken from the Throne of Chaos book, which is, again, one of the best campaigns ever. You'd start up in Zanbaijin, you'd push your way down into the Chaos Dwarf territories in the Darklands, and then you would fight your way through the World's Edge Mountains, leading up to a climatic battle in Null. Hopefully this also means that we'll get Elsef as the legendary lord for the Empire, and we can actually get the big final battle. The narrative is very, very important here in Total War Warhammer. I know some people don't notice it that much, but when DLC is straight from the narrative, from the established lore, it ends up with a weird thing. Like, for example, all the build-up for Yuan Bo's narrative and pretty much the Changeling too. Really, those were the ones that had the biggest build-up for Shadows of Change, and yeah, it just kind of fell flat. I mean, a lot of the DLC did, don't get me wrong, but it's very noticeable, especially as a lore fan, where you expect a really big battle, and it's just not there. So, in terms of unique mechanics, Tuamurkhan obviously would be able to switch bodies. It wouldn't be like the Changeling. What I imagine is they'll have maybe 5 or 6 preset bodies as skills, kind of like mount options, and as you progress leveling up, you'll get all the different bodies, and with the final one being Bubulos mounted. So you'll have the Ogre with Bubulos, and I mean, that kind of works. It'd be very unique. I just hope it isn't just like copy-pasting the changelings mechanic, just changing up the character a little bit by tinting them green, because, yeah, it would be kind of boring, and it would just be overused, so just having some set stuff there would be kind of cool. Now, in terms of faction mechanics, a lot of the stuff that Nurgle already has would probably remain the same. This would be the plague system. Really, the plagues work perfectly fine. Some of them are a little buggy, but hopefully they'll be fixed up by the time that a Nurgle-focused DLC does come out. Let's hope. But in terms of construction, I'm imagining that Tuamurkhan might actually go standard-style construction. Not with the cycle of life and death, but rather just a generic style faction. Now, hear me out here, right? What would be kind of cool and very thematic with Tuamurkhan's lore is a subjugation mechanic. You see, as Tuamurkhan moved down from Zanbaijin, and even at Zanbaijin, he was subjugating various different Chaos factions and putting them into his army. Kind of very similar to how a Everchosen would actually swell up his ranks to be able to lead a grand war. But what I would expect here is a bunch of buildings that are locked from all the other different Chaos factions. The Chaos Dwarfs, the Chaos Warriors for some undivided troops, and also the Beastmen. You'd defeat them in combat, subjugate them, and then you'd be able to recruit some Chaos Dwarfs, some Beastmen, and some other Chaos Warriors of the other Monogod factions into your ranks. You'd still be a Nurgle faction. In fact, I would say the best way to do this is give those troops a bit of a limit, so the more that they expand, the more that you get, and this would kind of line up to your final battle. The more forces that you subjugate, the easier that the final battle would be. I mean, in the lore, spoiler alert, if you haven't read a campaign from like nearly 10 years now, the Nurgle forces end up losing. It's one of these things that's just a very common thing, right? The good guys always win. Well, good is subjective in Warhammer, but you know what I mean? But, yeah, it would be kind of interesting. Here's hoping that they give Null a very unique-looking map, and we end up with something really, really special, right? Like a proper, multi-layered, really heavily scripted final battle. It would just be nice. Alright, Legendary Hero. Now, I've spoken pretty poorly about this character, but that's when people say that he should be a Legendary Lord. This is Epidemius, who is essentially a glorified accountant. Yeah, I know. There's boring jobs in the Warhammer Fantasy universe, it's not just this. Hell, in Bretonnia there's even a job where, yeah, all you have to do is just catch frogs. But as much as I dump on this character, you might actually be interested to know that he is fairly good. You see, Epidemius on the tabletop was a very good character because he had a really interesting ability. You see, as the battle carried on, as wounds were dealt, your faction would essentially just get stronger and stronger. And this is something that could be implemented very well here. A character which is going to be trash in combat, but very good in support, providing bonuses to the army that you have, and very similar to that of Gorta's Backstabber in all honesty. So the army that Epidemius would be attached to would in fact be one of the strongest in the game because you'd be getting more bonuses and more bonuses. What could be nice here too is also being able to get some infrastructure bonuses because obviously managing treasury and all that type of stuff is what accountants do in real life, and it would be very useful for Nurgle, which let's not sugarcoat it, they don't do well. This isn't just for Tuamurkhan, but also for Kugath. You'd be able to recruit him too if you decide to play as Kugath, if they ever fix his underlying issues, and we'll talk about Kugath a little bit later on in this video. But Nurgle definitely needs a support hero. I think that would fit with the flavor of the faction a lot better, and in general, right, like there are a lot of Nurgle characters, mostly Warriors of Chaos stuff, but Epidemius, even though he's not liked in a big way, he's still generally liked for a support character, so I feel like he'd probably be the strongest thing here. And he kind of fits. You could easily have him here with Tuamurkhan, with Kugath, and also with Festus. So yeah, why not? One thing I do hope, however, is that they do kind of update his design a little bit, because, I mean, you've already got access to plague bearers on the palanquins. They need to make him look a little bit special, or else it's literally just copy-pasting. Maybe make the palanquin a little bit over the top, add a little bit of different stuff. It's a bit of a difficult thing when looking at this character, to be honest. Alright, so we are missing some Chaos characters, generic stuff, and this would be the Chaos Lord of Nurgle and the Sorcerer of Nurgle, right? The basic one. This would be the Lord option for the melee and the Spellcaster for the heroes. So those need to be implemented in one way, shape, or form because we're missing them, and yeah, I mean, not having spellcaster heroes with Lore of Nurgle is a bit of a sad thing. And some people just like melee characters with their army leaders, right? It depends on the player. It's also the case of, you know, Tuamurkhan is a Warriors of Chaos character in general. Well, it's a fine line because of how the campaign ran, but some people are going to want to lead armies more with Warriors of Chaos stuff than maybe the demon stuff. The main thing here is it's better to have the option, even if it doesn't get used as much, than not have it at all. The big thing here, and it's not just for these two missing characters, but the ones that we already have in game, is maybe Creative Assembly should finally listen to the fan base and say, yeah, let's give them a Rotfly mount. Because it's about time that we started to see the generic Chaos Warrior characters being able to use their god-touched stuff, right? The War Shrine, the Horse, and the Chariots are cool, don't get me wrong, but still, it's much more thematic when you get them to have their god-aligned mounts, because that's what a lot of people used to do on the tabletop, right? I know Rotflies aren't the most impressive of mounts, like, let's be fair, they're pretty trash, but it still fits, and at the end of the day, if you're going to be running a full Nurgle army, you might as well go full whack rather than just using a horse. Now we're going to move on to the units, and the great thing about this, just like the generic Chaos Lords, is that, yeah, they'll benefit multiple factions. We're going to start off with the one that is the most important to me, which is the Pestigors. Because, please, I know people from Creative Assembly are watching my videos, so if you're watching, please, for the love of God, make sure that they actually look like Pestigors and not just recolored. Make them fat. Make them beefy. They're supposed to look like 45-year-old Englishmen in the Costa del Sol who are just pretty much overweight and overbearing. But yeah, give them great weapons, have them also for the Beastmen, because, yes. And hell, at this point, why not even have a generic Bray Shaman that can cast the Lore of Nurgle, which will then benefit the Beastmen more if you want to go for a little bit of a theme there with your Nurgle forces. That's not a deal breaker. I'm just fine with just Pestigors with great weapons, because it's the biggest thing. But I know some people want a little bit of extra flavor added in, which, yeah, I get. It works perfectly fine. Okay, so next we're going to move on to the Plague Ogres. So this was something that was shown in the Throne of Chaos book. And yeah, heavily mutated ogres. I know might not be the most interesting thing because, yeah, you know, we got a lot of ogres as it stands. But Plague Ogres have some of the coolest models. And the way that they work is they had a great weapon, but they also had, if you look on the side of the model, it's an Iron Fist, which kind of counted as a shield. So they could easily do 2 variants, maybe even 3 variants, give them additional hand weapons too. And there you go. These are heavy, very heavy duty units. They would be durable like Iron Guts, which would fit fairly well when it comes to the Nurgle faction, but generally quite fast too, because ogres are a bit faster than most Nurgle things. This would give you Ogre Charge, it would give you a devastating flanker essentially, and yeah, I mean, it's a super cool model. I have a bunch of Plague Ogres myself. These were some of the best casts that Games Workshop ever produced for Warhammer Fantasy, and it's a shame that we never got to see what was left of the Throne of Chaos campaign, the other 3 books, and from what I heard from very reliable sources, there were a lot of other cool monsters that we just never got to see. In an alternate world, well, you never know actually, with Old World coming up, maybe things get popular and they decide to kind of revisit that. So yeah, give these guys to the Monogod Nurgle faction and also the Warriors of Chaos faction, those who have access to the Nurgle corruption and stuff, and you're good to go, because Plague Ogres, well, Chaos Ogres in general, were a thing. It's a shame that we've not seen that represented here yet, and it's very likely we're going to see this using very similar base animations and the rig from the ogres that we already have, so it just kind of makes sense. Yes, it's technically a reskinned unit, but, I mean, make it look original at least. Heavy mutations. Bile Trolls are another missing unit, and I know some people are sick of trolls, because we do have a lot of trolls in the Warhammer universe. Hell, we don't actually even have... I think we're about halfway through if we go by all the unique stuff, actually. But, yeah, Nurgle-style trolls. These would be, again, shock troopers. I'm not too keen on trolls, in all honesty. This is a big thing. A lot of people who watch my channel for a while now know that I don't like trolls. Yet, even I think it's better to have and not need. And I know some people would like them. Essentially, very durable. They would be much better than armored chaos trolls and all that. They'd also have a spit attack, because... yes, so they'd be able to do a little bit of casting prior to getting into melee combat if you so wish to use that. And yeah, you know, regeneration, the usual stuff that trolls have. If you speak to Nurgle fans, especially those from the Warhammer Fantasy setting, if you ask them what they'd like to see here, they'd likely mention the Battle Trolls, and to be fair, I mean, they look very, very cool, right? And Battle Trolls are something that, if we're likely only going to get one Nurgle DLC, which very likely this is going to be it, yeah, I mean, why not? Have them accessible here for, again, Monogod and the Warriors of Chaos. So how it would work here is you'd get some Chaos Trolls and then be able to upgrade them into Battle Trolls. There you go, right? It fits really well with the theme. It, again, helps two factions. The Warriors of Chaos are getting a lot of love. It's very obvious, but it needs to be done. I mean, they're units for both, and in these cases, when DLC can help multiple factions, it should be done. I mean, that's an actual good thing that has come from Shadows of Change. You know, seeing the Incarnate Elemental go into the Beastmen also, or the Zangors going to pretty much everyone. Yeah, I mean, it works really well. Alright, Toad Dragons. So, this would be the mount for Tuamurkhan, but I imagine that Creative Assembly would be like, well, we've already made the model, why don't we make this, right? So, this would be a single entity monster, very fast, very devastating, poison attacks, it would have the spit attack too. It's essentially just the Nurgle version of the Dreadsaurian, and it should be used in the exact same way. I would like to see it limited in a similar way to that of the Dreadsaurian, but I know some people wouldn't like that because at the end of the day, nobody really likes limits. And at the end of the day, either way works as long as we actually see it as a monster, because it would be a massive shame again, yeah, and it's more the case of, like, it is a very impressive model, let's be very, very honest here. One of the coolest ones, again, the Throne of Chaos was just amazing for everything that was done here when it came to just new monsters and new creatures and stuff. God, I just hope that Old World ends up with cool creatures like this, you know, just bring back a lot of stuff and implement it to bring a lot more flavor to everyone. But yeah, big monster, quick, devastating. If you used the Dreadsaurian before, you know what you're using here. Okay, this is another generic thing. So, as you might be aware with the Warriors of Chaos right now, if you've purchased Champions of Chaos, and also a attached FLC, the Nurgle Warriors have access to, and these are the marked ones, same as the Chosen, the hand weapon and shield and great weapon variants, right? Cool. Why not just add in the remaining ones, halberds and additional hand weapons? Now, you might say that this was not a common thing. When you see Warriors of Chaos, tabletop armies and stuff like that, you'll generally see them with great weapons due to how the rules worked for them. That was kind of advantageous, or a hand weapon and shield. But the fact of the matter is they could still wield it, right? I know they've split it up for diversity in terms of the Chaos factions, you know, additional hand weapons going to Khorne, the halberd going to Tzeentch, and Slaanesh had the unique one with the whip. But I still think that, yeah, the generic ones, the non-unique weapons, should be with everyone, or at least where it makes sense. Halberds and additional hand weapons also does kind of work with Nurgle, actually. If you look towards how it used to work on the tabletop, some people used to bring them with additional hand weapons. See, the benefit on the tabletop was that the Mark of Nurgle made it harder for enemies to hit you, and you would use that to your advantage, so you wouldn't really need the shield. You would just bring in a additional hand weapon to be able to just hit an extra time, right? You want to throw out more attacks, because the Warriors of Chaos themselves could move fairly quickly. And this was the thing, right? While the lore pointed to one thing, the gameplay pointed somewhere else. This is why one of the more popular lists was a very aggressive front-facing Tzeentchian Chaos Warrior army. Rather than going with Khorne, if you wanted to focus on melee, you would sometimes do that with Tzeentch. It's just kind of silly when you don't have all the variants. We paid a decent amount for Champions of Chaos, and I'm not ragging on that DLC, it's very good, but we need to get the final variants out. Just so, again, it's better to have and not need. Plus, you know, the animations, the rigs, they're all the same. You can literally do that with a mod, right? It's just literally switching an asset and there you go. So, hopefully this happens officially, because I know some people don't like to use unit mods. Alright, this one we know is coming eventually, so I assume it's coming here. This is the Great Spined Chaos Beast, one of the coolest Forge World models ever. I've got two of them. One of them is fully painted. Oh, I love this one so much. The reason why it's going to come eventually is because if you get the Warhammer 3 art book, it's there and painted in green, so Yeah, but what is this exactly? This is essentially a Chaos Warhound, but heavily mutated. This is a big boy. The base was 100 by 150, which meant that it was basically the size of, well, pretty much any big beastie, like a Stonehorn and stuff. These are incredibly fast. They rip apart enemies really, really quickly. I don't know, man. There's something about this model which I just absolutely love. Nurgle could very much do with an incredibly fast creature. Like, it would be not as quick as a Warhound, because obviously the size would make it a bit slower, but the idea is something really, really quick to just smash into enemy lines, come in for the flank, come in for the rear, take out big monsters too. Like, this is a multi-purpose creature. Its jaws are there for a reason. Nurgle could benefit from this. The Beastmen definitely could. Maybe give it to the Warriors of Chaos, but I'm not too interested in the Warriors of Chaos for this. But it definitely fits with the Beastmen, because obviously this is a Chaos Warhound. But we know that they've been working on this for a while, because that art book came out pretty much at the launch of Warhammer 3. So that means that this was in the works for a while, the concept art at least. So they probably wanted to do it for launch, and it just didn't show up. Or maybe it wanted to pop up during the Champions of Chaos thing. Because let's be honest, in terms of new content, the Champions of Chaos doesn't really have a lot of new stuff. It just had a lot of reskins. Again, not complaining, because we got a lot of really cool characters, fun mechanics and so on, but it did lack on stuff. Now, the elephant in the room, and people are going to scream no end times, but screw it. Putrid Blight Kings. These are awesome troops, right? They were introduced in the end times, but the lore suggests that they've been here for a long, long time. They are essentially the aspiring champions of Nurgle. This is a big thing. We need unique-looking, heavily mutated aspiring champions for each of the monogod factions. As you can see in the tabletop, they would actually come as a mixed unit, so they have different weaponry and so on. In the case of Total War, mixed weapons don't seem to work. I mean, that's why we ended up with a very unique interpretation of the Man-Eaters. So that means that we could have a bunch of variants here, where we could have a a singular hand weapon and shield, a dual weapon, and then a additional hand weapon variant that would show off more mutations. These are supposed to be the most durable Nurgle Chaos Warriors ever. They form part of essentially the navy of Nurgle, which, fun fact, is the largest navy for the Chaos factions. Yes, they're an end times unit, but it's something that a lot of people want. They want heavily mutated warriors, and this is the ones that are going to be those. Small entity size, I think, like the aspiring champions is around 16 or something. That's what you'd get, but they'd be extremely powerful. And yeah, I mean, again, give us all the toys, right? If you want to sell DLC, you need to bring in stuff that is going to actually warrant the people purchasing it. Blight Kings are so popular that people were using it even when playing 8th edition stuff. Like, they would ignore the end times rules, but still allow for certain things like the Blight Kings to be used. Now, this is going to be the interesting one, because these do not exist in Warhammer Fantasy. They exist in Age of Sigmar, but they're essentially just Blight Kings mounted on Rotflies, right? So it kind of makes sense. It's about time that we started having some special stuff like this. And yeah, if people use the excuse of, oh yeah, but it's Age of Sigmar, it's like, it's literally just two models. It's literally just a Warhammer Fantasy thing mounted upon another Warhammer Fantasy thing. I mean, it's not out of the question. We have art of characters being able to do this, so I wouldn't imagine that Chaos Warriors shouldn't be able to do this too. So they'd be durable, they'd be super fast, they'd be flying around, again, low entity size, and this could be the equivalent of Rot Knights, right? Rot Knights was something that we knew about in Tuamurkhan's book, but unfortunately never had a model. They were mounted on horses, but do we really need another Chaos Warrior mounted upon a horse, or do we want something more unique like the Chaos Warriors of Khorne have, which after the Chaos Warriors, the Chaos Knights, you would get the Skull Crushers. So why not these? Why not some flying fast things to give Nurgle some much needed speed? Again, this would be for both the Warriors of Chaos and the Monogod factions, and I mean, I really like this. It'd be stupid for Creative Assembly not to do this. If Games Workshop say no, then Games Workshop really don't know their fan base and what they actually want, because this is something that we also want in the tabletop when we eventually get... Bit of a siren there from the ship. But when we eventually get the Warriors of Chaos army book, because there's all these rumors that it's just going to be undivided and then we're eventually going to see monogod books, this is something that could be added in to a monogod book, right? So here's hoping not only for Total War, but also for Old World, which is a big thing for me. Naturally, we're also expecting that anything that gets new content is going to get some sort of updates for the generic factions attached to it, like, for example, Kugaf, which is the legendary lord for Nurgle, the only one at the moment. Yeah, something needs to be done. I love the system. I absolutely adore the system. The cycle is really unique. It just needs to be, you know, fixed up in values here and there, so that way it actually ends up working as intended. Listen, I'm just sick of how the cycle works because it just focuses and forces you to play nothing but Nurglings. And I know some people are going to say, well, that's Kugaf's faction. I don't care, man. It's not done well. There should be a better way for the cycle, maybe faster cycles for everything, and certain buildings providing more units for other stuff. A little bit of a better economy boost would be perfect, just to fix him up a little bit and not make him as soul-sucking. I'm a type of person who plays very long campaigns, right? Like 400 turns at minimum, because I do these on live streams and so on, and it just gets really, really frustrating conquering half the world map, or even a bit more depending on the campaign, because different factions are a bit better for that, and all you have is Nurglings all over the place. I want to see all the really cool shit, right? We got soul grinders, we got great unclean ones. They need to be seen a lot more. It's frustrating that they just aren't common, right? Now, I know by this point in the video, you're wondering why am I saying Epidemius and not Kha'Zix the Befouled. To be honest, I would expect Kha'Zix to be introduced as an FLC, where, you know, he's the more interesting one, so it's kind of like a way for them to say sorry. Epidemius being the more boring one, you can put him as the paid content, because all the other big-ticket items are there for Nurgle. I would like to see Kha'Zix. I don't know if we're going to get 2 legendary heroes once again in every cycle. I mean, in the perfect world, we'd see 3 legendary heroes as paid content and 1 legendary hero as free content. I kind of like Kha'Zix, but he's just mounted on knights, right? He'd be boosting up knights and so on, which still doesn't really fit with the theme of Tuamurkhan, which, yeah, I don't know. Unless they decide instead of rot knights again being mounted horsemen, just put them on rot flies, and then Kha'Zix the Befouled could actually have a rot fly too, which would make things a little bit more interesting. Something like that I feel like could work really, really well, but I feel, in my honest opinion, having played this game for thousands of hours, and I'm just talking about Warhammer 3 at this point, Nurgle could use with a support character to buff up your armies and also faction-wide a tiny bit, whereas Kha'Zix the Befouled would just be focusing on knights. I really hope that we do see him, though, but, you know, in the future. Now, before we end this video, and I think this one's going to be the shortest one, we do have to talk about the fact that this pretty much completes Nurgle. In terms of missing units, unless newer stuff comes out in Warhammer the Old World and Creative Assembly decide to use the stuff from Old World, there's obviously some missing characters. 2 big ones would be Gutrot Spume and the Glotkin. I don't think you need Lord Packs to introduce them. Obviously, Thrones of Decay makes sense for Tuamurkhan. The other 2, and possibly others, you know, a lot of people do want Valnir the Reaper, for example. These are characters that could be done in character pack DLCs, which really should be explored. Creative Assembly should really see this as the perfect time to also add in DLCs like that during the lull. It's actually funny when you think about it. There's not that many units missing in terms of variants for pretty much every single faction, and what is actually missing is just loads and loads of characters. In a perfect world, we'd get a bunch of characters, but I very much doubt it, because Creative Assembly seem to be claiming that they're going to double down on this, obviously, but I really think that they're just biding their time until Total War 40k comes out, because it's going to happen. It's going to happen. I'll bet money on that. So, yeah. But let me know what you guys think regarding this list in the description, in the comments below. Sorry about that. It's been a long day. But, yeah, this is going to be a little series going forward. I wanted to talk about them all individually because, yeah, the videos are going to be quite large. It makes sense to split them up rather than, you know, just making a 2-hour-long video. But yeah, have a good day, guys. I hope you guys are all doing well and not suffering too much during the Christmas holidays, because God knows I am. See ya.